I guess the colored background was screwing up the color of the video, so I switched it to white and it looks better now. A couple of objections were raised, a couple of things that I've said, and again, Inmendham says that we may be too far apart to have a conversation, which may be the case, which is why I say it's not so much a question of our attempting to refute each other as, well, we're simply explaining our point of view. Now, I get it. I understand what he's saying. Now, the question is, of course, the question arises of the use of the past, I guess, as a tool. I use the term crutch, which was objected to, and okay, I'll switch it then. Let's say it's a tool. It's a very useful tool. In order to avoid, I guess, harm or terror. Okay, you can do that, but how useful, I would ask, is that tool? How useful is knowledge in terms of doing what we expect it to do? How useful is it for me to know that if I thrust my hand into the fire, I'm going to damage my hand and things like that? I'm not going to say it's useless, but on a continuum, depending on what we're attempting to do with our own existence, if anything, how useful is it to know how to avoid problems ahead, or even how to benefit from what might be coming? I would say so much of it is out of our hands, i.e. that which is determined, necessity, that kind of thing, that it might be useful to do it, to know a lot about the past, but I wouldn't really say ultimately it is, in a big picture sort of sense, decisively useful. We're going to get harmed anyway. There's certain harms you can't prepare yourself for. You study astronomy and you see just how tiny we are versus all the big chunks of whatever flying around the universe at breakneck speed, ready to collide with our planet or push scientific knowledge as far as it goes. And you've got entropy waiting for you, and we all know that we're mortal as human beings and all this sort of thing. So you sort of think, okay, the tools that we have to deal with the problems ahead of us are more useful than nothing. But in the grand scheme of things, I would say they're not really all that useful. It isn't so much that I'm saying that those tools are stupid or it's wrong to employ them. I think you just have to sort of put them in their proper perspective, in a sense. As I say, I sort of say that on a certain level the past and the future really don't exist, but by the same token I'm buying RESPs for my son. Why would I do that if the future doesn't exist? Well, RESPs aren't going to prevent an asteroid from vaporizing the planet, or a supernova in our own sun or something like this, or cancer, or none of that's really going to make any difference. It's just, well, I might as well do what I have to do, hedge my bets. But once I've done that, I understand that there's not a heck of a lot I can do, and that's kind of the meat and potatoes in a lot of quote-unquote life-denying thinking. Again, I apologize for using that term. I'm simply trying to, I think people know by now what I'm referring to. You can say that without the tools we're helpless, but really we're helpless anyway. You're just staring that fact in the face and admitting it. The image of Kali again comes to mind. You have to stare right into her eyes and see what kind of a universe we live in. And it's not nice. It's not horrible, but I guess it may be absurd. Now, what do you think about your own existence in that universe? Well, you like it or you lump it. There's not much you can do about it, really. I'm not saying that we do nothing, but you have to understand the limitations of what it is to be a human being. gnothi se auton, right? Know thyself, know what you are, know that you're a man and you're not a god. Men are mortal, men are limited, men are imperfect, humans. I'm just using, men sounds a little more poetic sometimes, but no sexism implicit in that. And another thing is when you stare into that sort of moment of becoming, that sort of chaos, that sort of kaleidoscope of ever-changing change, you are in a sense abolishing the past. Or if you do it with a view to abolish the past, they would say, why would you do that? Because the past is very useful in terms of avoiding, stepping on a rake that's going to smack you right in the nose. Well, yeah, it might be useful. That doesn't make it real. As I say, this computer I'm using right now is based on it's ultimately motivated by the power of electricity. We don't really know what electricity is. We don't know its ultimate nature. But that doesn't mean that the computer I'm using doesn't work. But getting something to work is not the same thing as learning something fundamental about it. So we can use the lessons of the past to do certain things, but that doesn't make the past any more real. The past is something we store here, and there's no actual solid reality to it. It's a bunch of assumptions. It's a bunch of inaccurate assumptions. And I guess that's why so many cultures devised mythologies, is they're trying to sort of say there are general rules to this. Morpheus said this is a system that has rules. Yeah, it has rules, but it's hard to say what they are. But if you see patterns in it, you can kind of hedge your bets or whatever, or what look like patterns. But what looks like patterns on a micro level might be complete randomness on a macro. In other words, I can take solid steps to avoid breaking my leg, which might seem to be a pretty rational thing to do, but I pretty much can't do anything to prevent the sun from exploding, or even myself from getting cancer. I can hedge my bets. I quit smoking 11 years ago. It doesn't mean I'm not going to get cancer. So I'm not really sure that we're, the difference is, I guess, what do we want versus what is real, and how do you determine that which is real? I would say that I determine that which is real by going from that which I can create, or I can be pretty sure of, be pretty solid. Again, my own existence. I hate to sort of belabor this, but my epistemology works differently from the way I think a lot of people's do. Certainly the most common one in the West is kind of empiricist or whatever. But I go with what I'm sure of. I know I exist. Even if I don't know what existence is, I know that I am. Cogito ergo sum, right? I can't prove any of that, but at this level of ontology, I'm not really interested in demonstrating to anybody else anything. I just want to know, what can I rely upon? What is certain here? Not what we can agree upon based on an assessment of the patterns in phenomenal reality. What is real? My existence is real. It's real to me. It's as real as anything can possibly be. And before anything else is real, I exist, because the only conduit through which I can perceive reality is through me. So I exist. I know that I have experiences. That's unmistakable. If I take drugs and see myself staring into the face of, I don't know, the beatific vision or something like this, or talking to Moses in the Old Testament, when I come down off that trip, I can sort of say, all right, I know that didn't happen. I wasn't teleported into the past and was talking to Moses, but the experience of me doing that did happen. Okay, it was a real hallucination. It was a hallucination that I actually did have. Nobody can say you didn't hallucinate. Yes, I did. I did hallucinate. So that's real. So my experiences are real. The third is that I place value on these experiences, but the value seems to be subjective because, I don't like being handcuffed and hung from the ceiling and whipped, but people do, I like eating a vegetable called bitter melon. Most people I know find it horrible. It's too bitter. It's delicious to me. I don't know why. It just is. Most people are driven crazy by the thought of listening to the same piece of music over and over again. I do it all the time. In fact, I rarely listen to just one song and go on to another one. I don't listen to an album straight through. I play the same song over and over again. One of the nicest inventions in the modern world was continuous play on MP3 players and things like that. I love that. I don't know why. My mind works that way. Most people's don't, apparently. I don't get satiated by repeating the same piece of music over and over again. The more I hear it, the more I like it. I don't know why that is. I can't explain it. It could be simply a question of appetite or taste. I don't know. But, Inmendham uses the metaphor of an amusement park. Okay, well, he doesn't like amusement parks. Maybe I do, And again, that's not a refutation of his position. That's just saying what are the starting points. It doesn't mean that how he sees it, it's wrong. It just says that we've got two separate base assumptions in all of this. And again, I keep having to say this. I'm in no way refuting anything that he's saying here. I'm fully aware of that. But in a sense, I'm not even attempting to do that. I'm just saying this is how I see things. Now, if I love amusement parks and somebody else doesn't, I get it that they can then look at me and say, what you're doing is you're creating danger for me, and why are you subjecting that to me to that? To which I can only say, you have the option of availing yourself of the same point of view as I do. I have the option of availing myself of your point of view. And you have to be honest with yourself when you're debating somebody else. You can't just anathematize what they're saying, because then you're shutting your brain out to it. And well, I suppose you could do that if that's what you want to do. But again, I always talk about how I don't really have that feeling towards religion of this is haram. Most people just think that, or most atheists that I know, and I really don't count myself as an atheist, but I never really have a big issue with people calling me one or thinking that I am one. It's not a big deal to me. But I don't walk around thinking that that churches are full of insane people, or that that religion is something that poisons your brain or whatever, or that it's, well, yeah, actually I hate to say this, but in a sense I do, but I don't think that religion is completely devoid of truth, I suppose, or useful cogitations or whatever. I think that in a lot of religious-based speculation, there's a lot of metaphor in there, where if you read it a certain way, it can actually be very useful to you. I just don't have that feeling that it's anathema. I don't have that feeling that it's haram, that it's that it's pollution or whatever. It's just I look at that and I go, well, that's a palliative for, it's a shortcut when dealing with life's problems or the problems of your own existence. You're creating a nice story, placing yourself in that story and saying that's reality. And I say that's, again, at the risk of talking in a Nietzschean way, I say that's kind of for the herd, because most people want their truths fed to them. And I maybe they don't want them fed to them, but they want the overt truths fed to them so they don't have to worry about it anymore. Or they want simple truths fed to them so they can figure it out, or they can just sort of live by them. Now, that, again, we get back to what's useful versus what's real, what will get me a result that I want versus what will actually teach me about what, the underlying reality of the situation. And the underlying reality of the situation is that, well, I'm not what, or I don't think that I am what science tells me that I am. And I don't think that I am what a lot of things tell me that I am. And I'm willing to challenge that directly to their faces. I don't have any problem with that. As I say, when you go down the path of, the left-handed view of things, when you go down the path of a poetic view of reality, and when you tell people to love what is horrible or whatever, you're going to get vilified, marginalized, and excluded. I don't care. I'd rather have that. I'd rather be excluded. But it strikes me that as sort of saying, okay, I understand that some tools are useful to get me certain results, but again, isn't that one of Zapfi's anchor, which he says that anchor might be jerked out of your point of view at any moment anyway, and it's not a good idea to rely too heavily on it. It does come down to like and lump, or love and hate, or this is my cup of tea or it isn't, I think, at a certain level of discussion. And we may have been this way, which is okay if you ask me. We may be at that position now. Because as I say, what I do is I take everything that Benatar says, everything that Ligotti says, everything that Zapfi says, everything that, even the Buddha or Mahavira say about the onerousness of existence, and why would you want to do that if you take the Buddha's noble truths that life is dukkha, that existence is off kilter. It may be, but it is existence. It's something that I can be sure of. It is something that I know exists. Now, Inmendham mentioned terror. Yeah, I get it. This staring of becoming square in the face, or even if you want to use the term, let's be honest, staring nihilism right in the face. Logic Rolls the Dice / Immanuel Kant dealt with a lot of things about moral nihilism and everything, and I've always said I'm not really a moral nihilist or anything like that, or any kind of a nihilist. But if you want to sort of push the term onto me, in a sense, yes, I am. What do you believe? Well, what do you mean by believe? Is belief that which you accept without evidence, or you take on somebody else's word? That's what I would say is belief. So what do I believe? Nothing. That, in a sense, that makes me a nihilist. And, if you are willing to accept that kind of nihilism, if you're willing to accept that unless I can actually see solid evidence of things like the past, then I'm not going to rely on it, or the future or whatever. But I do see solid evidence of becoming. I see solid evidence of my own existence. I see solid evidence of my experiences, and I see solid evidence that there are experiences or states that I like and I don't like. That strikes me as completely and totally irrefutable. I'm not saying that it's real in any sense that I can explain to anybody else, but for me, sitting in my own, the cockpit of my own machine, as it were, and I don't mean that literally, I'm just talking about first-person perspectives here, that's unmistakable. I am. There's existence is, I am. Well, even I am is not the same thing as saying existence is, but my existence is. Okay, that is irrefutable, at least to me. Now, this is going to cause anxiety to some people. When you start talking about things like eternity, when you talk about things like infinity, when you talk about non-finite, in other words, there's no identity to anything, because something that is finite has an identity. Something that is non-finite doesn't. You can't say this is where it is and this is where it isn't. If it's infinite, it just is, and that's the end of it. There's no past, present, and future. There's no line. There's a dot. And it's also a dot that's subject to a lot of stuff, a lot of experiences, a lot of happenings, becoming, that kind of thing. And again, it can be terrifying. In fact, I think for most people, if you're over-reliant upon mythologies, or if you're over reliant upon tools that you've gotten, that you've developed to help you cope with things, then it can be truly horrifying to see that your tools, just how puny or even non-existent they are. Utility doesn't demonstrate existence. Scientifically speaking, if I, repeat the rosary 30 times a day, statistically speaking, something nice is going to happen to my brain. My brain is going to be improved or whatever. Even people, they study, what is it, alpha waves or some kind of wave in the brain. They say if you do that, it helps you. Okay, well, I haven't demonstrated that Jesus exists or Mary exists or any of this stuff by doing that. I've just said this is useful. This is something that I can use as a tool to benefit myself. Which is not to say that I'm saying that it's useless. What I'm saying is that utility and truth are not the same thing. And again, what is it that you're attempting to do with your point of view? Some people say that the idea is to battle angst, fear, terror. Yeah, but there are other ways to deal with that. There are other ways to deal with the horror of existence, or what could be described as the horror of existence. And again, Tantra comes to mind. Tantra is all about horror. It's all about shoving the horror of existence right into your face, or the horrors of existence right into your face, and going beyond the existential horror that Zapfi's caveman was subjected to when he suddenly had his blinders taken off, or when Plato's cave dweller was tossed up into the bright sun. Okay, so you go mad at that moment. Then what? Keep going. In that vein of insanity, I'm kind of having a discussion in the comments section with Phoenix Chastain, and it's we're talking about the idea of sanity and insanity, and drugs came up even, because what I'm describing in terms of altering your state of consciousness, drugs inevitably have to be discussed. I'm not opposed to drugs per se, but the drugs that we have right now are so horribly inefficient that I think that it's not a good idea to dabble in them. In fact, it's probably the wrong thing to do. But that doesn't mean, like, for example, when I see somebody, or when I hear of somebody sticking a needle in their arm with opioids in it, I can say, okay, that's a bad idea, but I understand why they're doing it, because the experience is something that is worth having, if you ask me. But it's just there's a price that is paid for that makes it kind of, well, not only is there a price paid, but it's so uncontrolled that the only way you can replicate it is to get more of the same thing. How about if you can teach yourself to get there through coherent steps, which kind of brings into sharper focus certain views of pleasure. Pleasure isn't just that which we blindly assimilate to ourselves. We can actually bring that about, and we can actually sharpen our perceptions of pleasure and joy and everything. We can change, we can transvalue our values. So if you're altering your perception of things, or if you want to truly alter your perception of things, you're kind of changing everything, and there's no quicker and more reliable way to do that than to take drugs. But there are so many problems with that at least as pharmacology stands now, no way. If you are able to successfully use drugs, then you're the exception rather than the rule. I'll put it that way. But it is an interesting thing. You sort of there's this almost Catholic view that if it feels good, it's probably bad, that permeates our society. And my objection to drugs is not that. It's not that I think it's immoral or anything, or unhealthy even. I just said that I just think that it's our knowledge of brain chemistry is so limited that and our knowledge of how to manipulate it is so limited that I think that we're eons, or well, I shouldn't say eons, but a long ways away from getting useful downside-free drugs. It could happen, maybe, but again, you understand that there's going to be consequences to that, and that's the interesting thing. Just because, okay, if I say do a pile of crystal meth and I feel great for X number of hours, per my own view of becoming, I can sort of say, what difference does that make, because there's only the present. And that's a perfectly valid objection. Why are you worried about the future? Because there are consequences to what you have done. Now, that is when you ignore the future, you're kind of, or if you say it simply isn't there, if you disregard it, then you're also making the same error, because you're sort of disregarding the evidence of your perceptions. Even though you might have to find some other way to describe what you mean by the future, something is taking place that needs to be paid attention to. Now, also I was talking with Phoenix about the idea of sanity. What is sanity? What is the proper way to perceive things? When you study the left-handed view of things, there is an awful lot of literature about drugs, alcohol, all this kind of thing. An interesting guy that the Indians are kind of celebrated is a fellow called Bamakepa. He was they've made an extremely long series in Bengali television about his life. He was a drunk, drug-addled saint who is still revered to this day. He was allegedly, he's one of the few people who was actually able to pull off the use of drugs and alcohol and all kinds of weird things, to commune with the divine or whatever. And he's known, as these people often are, as the mad saint. So I guess that's a nod to the fact that maybe you can actually do it, but it's still, he's a saint. It's not that he was a saint, therefore it's fine for him to do that. No, he became a saint because he was one of the very tiny number of people who was able to get there, or whatever, through the wrong way, through being drunk all the time, through being on drugs all the time, or fist fights or stuff like that. Again, there are nods to this in Western literature and Western thinking, like Charles Bukowski. But again, that's when you call these people saints or celebrities, you sort of have to say that you in a sense, you're pointing out the fact that is definitely the exception rather than the rule, and you better understand what you're getting into when you dabble in this kind of thing. So yeah, I think that the objections that Inmendham has raised to what my point is are perfectly valid, but again, they're based upon his underlying assumptions, and those are assumptions I don't share. If you sort of say, why would you kick away the tools, because then you're helpless, I would simply say you're helpless anyway. I'm just saying maybe it might be a good idea to embrace that helplessness, because once you do that, you can sort of, instead of trying to fight off things that you can't fight off, you can then concentrate on the good stuff that might come your way, or you can concentrate on making yourself more fertile ground for that kind of good, the beneficial stuff, as opposed to the horrors. And you can even, if you're able to, instead of saying I want to avoid all the bad stuff, I want to transform it into something good. I want to turn the sewage into Dom Perignon or something like that, at least in terms of how it tastes when I drink it. There's a tantric image for you. If you've ever heard of the Agoris, that's the idea. They just violate every possible rule, and Bamakepa was kind of an Agori. They just violate every possible rule in order to come to terms with the fact that these things are realities of our existence, as opposed to pushing it away or trying to dodge it. Know thyself, I don't think we can dodge it.